This is the second video about complex masks in Lightroom version 11. In this video, I'll show you how to invert a complex mask, because that, for some strange reason, is not possible. And I'll also show you a few quirky things in the interface. I'm Nicholas, and let's do this together. Let's start by building a complex mask with Lightroom and try then to understand how Lightroom is making this mask. And that'll help us understand how we can play around with it. So we'll start with the base mask, which is the subject, and we have a pretty good selection of the tree there. It's not perfect, so what I'd like to do is to subtract, or the idea is to get rid of the holes here in the tree. If I zoom in, there are some gaps we need to get rid of, and I think the easiest to do that is to subtract a color range. I'll click on color range, and then with a color picker you can kind of click in there, and if it's not enough then you stay pressed on shift, get a little plus next to the picker, and pick another color range and maybe a third one, and then you can refine that just to make sure you've got what you want. And maybe I've taken off a little bit too much, so I want to add some more back with a brush. Maybe let's take a brush with auto mask and try and paint in some parts here. Now, it's not really obvious what I'm adding on, so I will add on something completely ludicrous just so we can see what we're doing, and I will add on the tree stump up here. That's too much, so press on Alt or Option on the keyboard to clean up around, and there we have nice complexity in the mask. Not complex enough because I have the subject I've subtracted, I've added, and I think I need to intersect. So then we've got all three operations. So let's intersect with a linear gradient. Just bear with me, we'll select the tree kind of halfway, and there we have everything we need. Now let's have a look at exactly what we have here. I'll to zoom out there. We have the subject. Color range, notice the little minus box. Now I can zoom in there, look. There we have the subject. The color range here is subtracted, and you can see what's been selected there. The brush strokes we can see on the screen also, and they have been added, so there's no sign, just like the subject. So naturally the addition is union, won't have a sign. Color range is a subtraction. A linear gradient that was in intersection is written with a minus. Now if you remember what we said in the first video, subtracting is intersecting with the inverse. And something strange here, if you have a look on the options, let's zoom out a bit to see that menu. On the color range here, color range, which is a subtraction, the mask isn't inverted. On the linear gradient, which is an intersection, the mask has been inverted, which means that Lightroom, the engineers at Lightroom actually programmed how to subtract, how to add, how to subtract, and the intersection was made with subtracting the inverse, the complementary of the brush, whereas normally in mathematics the first two operations are union and intersection, and the subtraction is something added on which is an intersection with the inverse of the set of the mask. So that has been built backwards compared to the maths. That's something a little bit quirky. Let's go back to the notepad. I'll show you how to invert a complex mask. So just to remind ourselves, if we have a mask, a set, a selection, A, the complementary is A bar, it's everything that is not A. So here we could write this is not A, the complementary, A bar is not A. The union or the addition in Lightroom of two selections is the pixels that are in A or in B. Now it's not exclusive, or they can be in both, but they are either in A or in B. Everything that is in A or in B is in the union A union B, and Lightroom will call that A add to B, or B added to A. The intersection, you are in the intersection, Lightroom says intersection, if you are in A and in B. So it's only the zones that overlap where you are actually in both at the same time, where you are in the intersection. And the subtraction of A minus B is really when you are in A and you are not in B. And everything in A and not in B is what we call A minus B. So in A and is an intersection. A and not in B is A intersected with not B. So now we want to invert a mask. Right. Oh, lost that. Sorry. Go back up again. Okay. So inverting a simple mask is easy. Lightroom has it. There's a little box to check. That's done. But there is no option to check the inverse of a complex mask. So let's have a look. What is the complementary of a union? So what is this white area? So we are in the white area. We are not in the union. If we are not in A and we are not in B, this zone here, I colour it in around here, everything around here on the outside here is everything that is not in A and it is not in B. So A union B bar, which is the complementary of the union, is really A bar intersected with B bar. We are not in A and we are not in B. So if you want to inverse a union, then what happens is that the union becomes intersection. Just change the sign. A becomes A bar, B becomes B bar, and then you've inverted your mask, you've inverted your selection. Now, let's have a look at the intersection. What is the complementary of an intersection? Well, the complementary of the intersection is everything that is, well, not yellow, it's everything else here. So we are in the complementary of the intersection. Keep the writing in red. Let's get back into blue, do this neatly. So we are in the complementary of the intersection if we are either we are not in A or we are not in B. So everything not in A will be coloured around, so that includes B, everything that's not in A, and everything that is not in B, that includes A, and we've covered everything. And if you've got hold of the logic, the intersection has become union. A became A bar and B became B bar. So if you want to get the complementary of a complex mask, you need to change the operation intersection or union into the other one, and you need to invert all your masks. And that will obviously work on the subtraction, because a subtraction is an intersection. Now, the only thing is, in Lightroom, we cannot change a union, an addition, into an intersection. Let's go and have a look. In Lightroom, we can invert a component of a complex mask. So if this complex mask, if I double click there, I write tree, and this tree is made of 4 masks. The main subject, we have subtracted a color range, added a brush, and intersected with a linear gradient. And we can invert individually each of these 4 masks. You have a look here. The intersection is already inverted because it was an intersection. But there's no way here, if we click here, there's no kind of invert button. And we'd like to do that. So what we'll do is we'll duplicate this mask tree and we'll call it background. Double click, background, and I want to invert that. Now normally I should change the additions into intersections and then invert. But as Lightroom has actually learned how to do subtractions first, then if you have a look, all we'll need to do is change additions into subtractions, because by changing that, the addition into subtraction will automatically invert the mask. And then the subtractions into additions will automatically invert the mask as well. So actually, it'll make things a bit easier. So what do? Subject, invert. So that is the base mask, is the inverts of the subject. And the color range was a subtraction, convert to add. The brush was a subtraction, convert to add. And the linear gradient was an intersection. So really for Lightroom, it was a subtraction of the invert, the inverse mask here, with convert to add. And there we have the background. Now it doesn't look like the background, but that is the tree and that is the background. Now let's just check this is working. If I up the exposure, then move the exposure of the tree up and down, I have the tree. And let's press on over to get rid of the mask effect. And that is everything that is not the tree. We do have here, if you have a look, I can actually make a nice hole there, or I could just fill it in. So the two masks are essentially inverted. If you want to have a better or a quicker demonstration there, I did it with the tree there, we could just do a simple graffiti and see how it works. Okay, let's just check all that again, and let's make a new mask with a radial gradient. So I've set the feathering to 0. Radial gradient. Let's add some brush strokes with a feather of 0. So let's add some parts down here at the bottom. Let's subtract brush strokes. So, okay, it's nice and silly. And we could intersect with, let's say, the subject. So I now have a complex mask, which is made with a base mask, add a brush, subtract some brushes, and intersect with a subject. That's mask 1. Now, if I duplicate this mask and call this invert, then I would invert. So the base mask is at the bottom in the stack. As you add them, they go up. The first one is at the bottom. Then the brush, convert to subtract. The other brush, convert to add. And the third one, convert to add. And now you have 2 brushes. You have the first one, which we'll put to black, and the second one, which we will put to white. It is exactly 2 inverted masks. So that's how to invert masks in Lightroom. Now let's have a look at another little quirk there is in this masking system. Let's build a mask using a linear gradient. I want to select the trees here on the right with a nice kind of fade into the sky. If I move that like that, you see I have some of the sky that is selected, and I will subtract the sky from there. Now I have some bits in the water there that are not too good, but if I click on show overlay and let's say warm up that part, maybe a bit of exposure, a bit of dehaze. There, I did a bit of sunshine to the right hand side. Now imagine, so I'll call this mask trees, and I want to do something to the sky, but I know that I want to kind of use the same mask because I've got the sky and I've got this gradient. So I think I'm going to duplicate this and call this sky, and then instead of doing the trees minus the sky, do the sky minus the gradient. So you can move the components around in a complex mask. I'll move the sky down to the bottom of the stack, which makes it kind of the main subject. And then I want to subtract the linear gradient. Now, if you see, I've moved the mask, but the operation has followed And if you have a look at what's selected, well, I just have here, I'll double click on effect on this sky here. And if you see what's selected, I actually have the gradient. So I think, well, that's normal because I didn't subtract it. So I convert that to subtract. And what do I have now? Nothing. The sky's not there. The sky's gone. Now, why is that? Because it's at the top of the stack and it is with a minus, it's subtracted. Now, that's strange because anything at the top of the mask cannot be in a subtraction. It has to be in an addition. It has to be kind of the main subject. So this should automatically, in my view anyway, automatically the mask that is at the bottom or the top of the pack, if you like, the top of the stack, should automatically be converted to an additive mode, or else it's just not there. And now it's working. If you like, I could add, just to see what's happening, a bit of clarity, a bit of dehaze. You can see what's happening there with the dehaze. Now, some problems on the right. I have to kind of subtract. No, not the subject. Sorry. Anyway, I won't do that. That's just to show you the quirky thing when you move things around and you put them at the top of the stack. There are some things that are missing for me. Let's say go back to the trees here. And if I went kind of a bit too strongly on that, now I'm using 3-4 sliders here. I could actually use more. And if the effect is too strong, I haven't found, I don't know if it's there, but I haven't found an overall opacity to the modifications I'm making on this mask, on this complex mask. Here, there's nothing that says opacity. I'd like to have a global slider that says, okay, all this effect, I can put it between 0 and 100% just to adjust it afterwards. Because otherwise I have to adjust each slider individually and it might not give me the same, exactly the same effect. If you see what I mean, if I have to do them individually rather than globally. So I don't know if that exists. I really miss that. Another thing I miss, well, two things I miss also. I miss not being able to collapse complex mask into a single mask, which I could then invert, or I could, let's say, if I've got sky, intersect with, and here I'd like to see the previous masks here intersect with a previous mask that I already made. So I'm hoping that'll appear one day, especially if you select a subject and the subject isn't quite selected properly. So you add and you subtract and you modify that to get a complete subject. And the next time you select the subject, well, you have to do it all over again because you can't do operations with the corrected subject. So that is a problem. Last thing I'm missing in these parametric masks. So here we have the parameters, the color range, which is the hue. We have luminance. Why don't we have chroma? Chroma is the amount of color in the pixel, what Lightroom calls saturation, which is in reality chroma. That could be a good base for a selection. I could choose, let's say, the parts of the photo which are colourful, maybe the ones that have got the most sunlight, and just modify the colour or the intensity of that. So that'd be nice to have. And another parameter I'd like to see added on is a frequency parameter. Frequency being the amount of detail. So high frequency are the amounts of high detail. So I could select, let's say, just this tree in front and not the background, because you can see that the level of detail is higher here than just behind. Or the parts of low frequency, typically in the skies, in the bokeh, in the background, on flat surfaces, where you could help you make a better selection of that. So that's a couple of quirks and things that are missing that I'd like to see in future updates. Overall, though, it's a fabulous update to the previous versions. We at last have a masking system that enables us to do most of the editing in Lightroom and not going over to Photoshop. So that ends it for this second video on complex masks in Lightroom, and I'll see you in the next one.